Welcome to the show. Well, this man needs very, very little introduction. The former England captain, now familiar to one and all on Sky Sports cricket coverage. Welcome to 98, Mr. Michael Atherton.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Lots of things to talk about, but I'll just try and make it interesting. So let's just start off with the fairly obvious that England...
That would help. Making it interesting would help.
Yeah, always interesting. England have just finished a tough tour of India and Sri Lanka. I just wondered what you thought, Mike. What was your assessment of England ahead of the domestic season now?
The first thing, I just thought that cricket was really watchable throughout, which is one of the main things when you're watching on as a punter or a pundit or commentator, whatever. You want to see interesting cricket. And I thought it was interesting for all kinds of reasons. It didn't all go England's way, of course, but you know, some of the turning pitches that we saw in the India Test matches made it, you could hardly take your eyes off the action because the action was moving so quickly and wickets were tumbling. So it was really interesting. Same in Sri Lanka. Thought the white ball stuff was excellent as well at the end of the series. So I remain a little bit in awe of the players continuing to put on really fascinating cricket despite the lack of crowds. I mean, I know that for two of the games in Ahmedabad, they had 60 or 70,000 people, but generally it was behind closed doors cricket. And as last summer in England, when the cricket was excellent, despite the fact that there were no crowds, you know, the players continued to amaze me really with how well they're playing and the quality of cricket that they're producing with no audience in. So that'd be the first thing. I mean, in terms of England, the test matches were a bit up and down, weren't they? Good against a less good Sri Lanka side, but then very much second best against really the powerhouse of the game, India. I mean, India have got such strength in depth across all formats. They're going to be very hard to beat if they play anything like. When you look at the resources that they've got, both population-wise, the love of the game in the country, the money behind Indian cricket, it makes them a really, really powerful operation. So most of the World Cups now and Test series, India are going to be one of the favoured sides. And I think we saw that strength come through against England over the three formats.
Well, I think we saw it at the end of the Australia tour as well, didn't we, where they won that final Test match with what can be seen as a second 11.
Absolutely. They're missing so many key players, not least Kohli, and Rahane did brilliantly stepping in as captain. But then, as you say, a number of young players who came to the fore, Rishabh Pant, who played brilliantly against England as well, Washington Sundar, Mohammad Siraj, all these guys who were really making their initial bows in Test cricket, not Pant because he'd been around a bit before, but it just showed the strength in depth that India enjoy to become an Indian cricketer now, given the numbers of people that play the game in that country and the strength of cricket around the system. You've really got to be a top-notch player. So anybody who gets an Indian cap these days, you can be sure is going to be a half-decent player.
We were talking about this with NASA last week, and it intrigues me that, as you say, when you get your chance in Indian cricket, you've really, really got to take it. And we've seen several over this winter come on, no fear, and really make a mark. Whereas, I think in English cricket, when we get someone new come on, we kind of almost like apologise for them and say, oh, you've got to give them time, you've got to blood them in and this, that and the other. What is the difference between those two approaches?
I think it's a reflection really on the competition within Indian cricket. You know, you've got 1 billion people in the country. Cricket is absolutely the number one game. It's the equivalent of football here, where anybody wants to become a cricketer in India. So that combination of the numbers, the popularity of the game means that there's intense competition. And so, and therefore, when you do get your opportunity, so there are a couple of lads who came in the white ball leg of the tour, Ishan Kishan, who got an opportunity before being injured. These guys know they've got to grab it because there are brilliant players who they may just be replacing for a game or two, like Rohit Sharma or Virat Kohli if he steps away for a game. So they know they've absolutely got to take the opportunity. And they also know that below them are any number of young cricketers pushing hard to get opportunities. So I think it's just an intensely competitive environment. And in a way, it's a little bit like Australian cricket was, I think, when I was playing in the kind of early mid-90s, when Australia could have put out 2 or 3 test teams that would have challenged anybody. Their second string team would have been excellent, as would their third string team, because Sheffield Shield cricket at that stage was intensely competitive. And I just think that's how Indian cricket is right now, for all kinds of reasons, the resources that they have. And that then creates its own natural competition and naturally positive environment where the cream will just rise to the top. And I think it's not quite as competitive in England for obvious reasons, population, resources, whatever, the strength of football, all those kind of reasons. But it's very different in India for sure.
Those new players breaking into the side seem to have broken in with so little fear as well. They've broken in wanting to take their opportunity rather than afraid not to.
Yeah. And I guess that must be just a reflection on their own character, but also a reflection on the competition within the system. Because as they rise to the top, they're facing that kind of competition at every level they get to. So even under 19 level, for example, Shubman Gill or Prithvi Shaw, whoever you're talking about, these guys have got to that stage under intense competition there. So they're kind of used to it as they then go up to the next stage in first class cricket or under 25 Indian team and then the A team. That level of competition is just there throughout. So they get very used to it.
England pushed them close though. I think, am I right in saying we won the first test and then not so well after that? We won the first ODI and then not so well after that, and we won the first T20 and not so well after that. So
yeah,
England
were competitive for sure. And they had their opportunities, actually. The frustration in the Test match series was that they had opportunities even after that first win in Chennai, which was one of the great overseas wins. And then in the other games, they had opportunities. They won some good tosses. They had opportunities in the best conditions, and they didn't quite nail those opportunities. So it was a little bit frustrating from that point of view. But they were competitive throughout. The white ball games were all really competitive in 50-over cricket and T20 cricket. The day-night test that finished quickly was not so much in the test series. But other than that, and in general, I thought England were competitive.
And it must be very difficult to play any format of cricket when there's any doubt in your mind about the wicket.
Well, the wicket, there was a lot of chat about the wicket and the pitches. My own view is I quite like the variety in pitches. I mean, you wouldn't want a 2-day game every time you see a test match, but I quite like the fact that occasionally you will get an extreme surface that offers a challenge of a different kind to batsmen and bowlers. It's not even on a turning pitch. You've still got to be able to land the ball on a sixpence and take that kind of pressure and expectation that falls on the spinners. So I quite just like the variety of conditions. You go to Perth and you get a fast bouncy pitch. You go to Brisbane, the same. You might come to Headingley and it seams around, swings around. You go to Chennai or Mumbai and it turns square. I mean, that's the beauty of the game. And if you have a long, successful career as an international cricketer, you know you will have come up against all these different kind of conditions and you will have had to prove yourself in a variety of conditions. And I think that's an entirely good thing.
Do you have any tours that kind of bring back the same sort of memories where you had such conditions?
I don't think we had as extreme conditions as the one faced in those couple of games in Ahmedabad. But I mean, bizarrely, although I played over 100 test matches for England, in those days we didn't go to the subcontinent very often. I only played one test in India out of 115, which is an amazing statistic, really. We only toured India once in test matches for the entire length of my test career. But on that tour, we played in Chennai and we played in Mumbai, and the pitches did spin. I don't think they spun quite as much as the Ahmedabad game, but they did spin. And then you'd go to Perth in Western Australia. You know, we'd be standing 40 yards back for Devon Malcolm. It was so fast and bouncy. And that's the beauty of the game. That is the absolute beauty of the game, that it throws up all these challenges and you have to try and overcome them.
You mentioned about characteristics of various pitches and grounds. Perth, for example. Now, in your day, Perth was long established as being a fast bowler's paradise with glassy pitches. In Australia, a lot's changed. Perth is a good example that they no longer even use that stadium. They built more of these sort of all-purpose venues. And it seems to be happening throughout the world. Old Trafford, your old ground, doesn't look anything. In fact, they've even turned it 90 degrees.
I think Old Trafford looks the better for it, I must say. I mean, You're right. There are very few grounds now where I stand on the middle, look round, and can imagine having played there. Old Trafford being a classic example. They've completely turned the square around. The ground has been totally transformed since I played there, and I think it looks a much better ground for it. You're right about Australia. They have a number of drop-in pitches, a number of places like Adelaide and Melbourne that are multi-sports use, play Aussie rules in the winter and cricket in the summer. And as you rightly say, in Perth now they've built the new multi-purpose stadium, although they still might use the WACA for some games. And what you want to avoid really is a uniformity of pitches. So we played on one in the test match in Melbourne 2017 when Cookie from your part of the world got a massive double 100 and played brilliantly, but it was a very dull test match because it was just a bog standard flat pitch that did nothing. And so that's what you want to avoid really. You might as well go and play on artificial surfaces if that's what you're going to get. What you want is, and what used to be the great thing about traveling Australia, would you get a different surface for every game?
Your career, for me, was highlighted by some really good confrontations and tussles, real lockings of horns. Now, two that spring to mind, obviously Alan Donald in South Africa at that time, and also Glenn McGrath, and you mentioned earlier Kirtley and Courtney out in the West Indies. I was lucky enough to be out in Barbados back in the 90s and was there to witness firsthand what you and Alex Stewart were having to put up with. These days, would you say there were equivalents of... the one that springs to mind to me recently is Ben Stokes and Marlon Samuels, where there was that kind of needle. Is it still around, or is it something that's missing a bit?
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, I'm not out in the middle. I mean, I sense that, that level of competitiveness is still there. If you look at Virat Kohli, for example, India's captain, he's very expressive. He's very competitive, wants to win every game. I think that shines through, actually, in the way that he plays. In terms of the fast bowlers, I think the standard of fast bowling in Test cricket over the last 2 or 3 years has been very strong, actually. I thought it went through a slight phase where it dipped, but the last 2 or 3 years, it's been very strong. Australia, South Africa, West Indies have had a comeback with fast bowling. India, as good a crop as fast bowlers as they've ever had. So it's looked really competitive to me from a distance. And yeah, I mean, I loved all that, really. I love the real competition that you develop with a particular opponent, and it has to develop over time. So like, Alan Donald, our careers coincided. South Africa got back into world cricket in 1992, which is kind of the start of my Test career. And we played against each other then until I retired in 2001. So I played a lot against each other, and you develop a relationship or rapport, whatever you want to call it, against the particular bowler. And, you do it over 5 tests. So you keep having those battles that crop up. And I thought that was fantastic, really. I loved playing against him. We always got on great off the field, had a bit of a ding-donger on the field. Nothing ever went too far. People talk about sledging, but wasn't, occasionally it would develop out of the action, but there was never any deliberate intent to sledge or put people off their game from the start. So I loved it. Thought it was great. The West Indies never said a word. Kirtley and Courtney just never said a word on the pitch. They just let their bowling do the talking, and they were pretty good at that.
You mentioned Alan Donald. Is that right that he used to target you with the bumper because you had difficulties ducking under it?
Not really. I mean, I had a bad back as I went through my career, and later on struggled a bit. Was a bit stiff and immobile, but not in the early days. He basically bounced anybody who came to the crease. I mean, he was very fast. In his early days, probably actually just slightly before South Africa got back into world cricket, Alan came and played as an overseas player for Warwickshire. And he was unbelievably quick and a bit wild and woolly. And then he became a much more disciplined bowler as an international cricketer for South Africa. And he was still very quick, but maybe just not quite as quick as he had been in the early days for Warwickshire. But he, along with Brett Lee and Shoaib Akhtar, were probably the 3 fastest bowlers of my particular generation.
I'll ask you something probably not everyone asks you about, but the Mutus are from Georgetown, Guyana. I was born here, but you obviously are married to a Guyanese lady, and I've seen you write some really, really good articles about Guyana and Georgetown and what life is like. I went there in 1983 when I was 16, and it was under Forbes Burnham, where it was a Marxist cooperative. And that was soldiers on the streets and curfews and all that kind of stuff. Very, very difficult for people. But I think that was kind of brushed aside when cricket teams came through on tour. But I think it's, and talking, well, we've still got family out there. Things seem to be better these days, though, and it's a bit of a different place, I gather.
Well, a lot of Guyanese left around that time, as you'd probably be aware, because, as you say, it was a difficult situation. The economy rather tanked, and a lot of Guyanese left. My wife's family stayed throughout that, and although my wife's father is no longer alive, so there's not much. She doesn't have much family there, but still has the family home in Georgetown. So we go back a little bit, and she goes back more than I do. But I've always enjoyed going to Georgetown. As you know, it's quite a chaotic place, but interesting and full of character. I mean, the ground there, they no longer use now the border, which is the old test ground. And they built a new stadium slightly outside of Georgetown. But the old ground, the border, was so atmospheric, small, ramshackle wooden stands all around. But when you got a crowd in, it was a fantastically vibrant atmosphere to watch cricket, right in the heart of town. So, working man and woman could just wander up after work to watch the cricket. Wonderful place to play. And I still enjoy going to Georgetown. I haven't been there for probably 2 or 3 years now. But as I say, my wife goes back a little bit more and still have the family home in Georgetown.
Yeah, I think our family home is right near border. Because I seem to remember when we went, it was like a hop over the back fence and through a couple of alleyways, and there you were. But it's an interesting point about, now you played through that era in the West Indies, but all of the grounds seem to benefit. Barbados is another example, Sabina Park, Trinidad, of these kind of ramshackle grounds heaving to the rafters with very noisy locals, the conch horns, the helpful comments to the fielders.
I think playing and watching cricket in the Caribbean is the greatest experience. It's a little different now because test matches are not followed as they once were. You still get fantastic crowds for one day and T20 cricket, but not for test matches so much. Although when England go and play, if they're playing in Barbados or Antigua, kind of one of the tourist destinations, there'll still be a big crowd, largely because of England supporters as much as anything. But as you say, back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s, when you'd play at these grounds, which were right in the heart of the city centre or town centres. Antigua is another one, the old recreational ground in Antigua, which is next to the prison, right in the heart of downtown St John's. Fantastic atmosphere, the best atmosphere to play in and watch cricket. And now, of course, they've got the new stadium, the Sir Vivian Richards Stadium, which is a good stadium, but it's out in the middle, outside of town, and not quite as atmospheric, if I'm honest. Watching and playing cricket in those stadiums in the Caribbean, just fantastic. Some of my best memories would be playing test match cricket in the 90s in the West Indies.
35 in Antigua in 1994. My quick review of the records show me.
I got a few there, but I'm afraid we'd been in the field for about 2 days watching Brian Lara, because that was the game that he got his first world record. He got a second world record, of course, years later. But that 1994 game in Antigua, he got his 375, West Indies racked up 600, and then myself and Robin Smith got decent-sized hundreds, and the game just petered out to a draw. And the irony, of course, is that ground at St John's, the recreational ground, the groundsman is Andy Roberts, or was Andy Roberts. You had this great fast bowler, one of the greatest that's ever played the game, producing a completely graveyard pitch where fast bowlers couldn't get anything out of it, and it was a bit of a run fest. So there was an irony there.
Run fest or rum fest?
Run fest, but not a difficult one for bowlers, I tell you. And I think Andy was making life hard for those who came after him.
Well, I mean, Through your career, so many highlights and milestones. Is there anything that sticks out for you as a special memory or a special moment?
Well, on the tour of the Caribbean that you're talking about, we won a game in Barbados, having been bowled out for 46 in Trinidad when we should have won the Test match. We really should have won that game, and then got rolled for 46 by Curtly Ambrose. And then we won in Barbados, which was one of the great occasions, partly because of the atmosphere that I mentioned. And at that stage, it was probably half English, half West Indian crowd. And West Indies hadn't been beaten there since 1934, I think. So it was an incredible occasion. But lots of those highlights, the lowlights all came against Australia. We never beat Australia, never won the Ashes. Australia were far too strong for us in that era. But every other team we managed to win a series against, albeit, there were plenty of low moments thrown in as well.
How's it been commentating this winter? We've had Bumble on, and he was telling us about he sat there with his iPad up in Lancashire. You, Nasser, and Keezy have been at the Sky Studios, but how have you handled not being in the stadium and just sort of, I'm assuming you're just looking at the same pictures that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible what you can do, as you would know, with technology these days. As you say, Bumble was in Manchester, 3 or 4 of us were in West London. We'd have Dinesh Karthik or somebody else.
He was great.
Yeah, he was fantastic. So he was in Chennai and Mumbai. For the Sri Lanka series, we had Mahela Jayawardene and Kumar Sangakkara. They were out in Colombo. So I had all these people joining the broadcast from all corners of the world. And it went pretty seamlessly. So it's amazing what you can do. But as you say, you just don't quite get the same feel for it. You're not talking to the players to the same degree. You don't get a feel for the conditions. Certainly in the one-day games that we covered in the India series, ball goes in the air, you're not quite sure where the fielders are. You can't tell how well they've hit it. So, it's not as good, not as ideal, but, we're living in those times where you just got to do what you can. And given the restrictions, I thought it was an amazing thing to put together, the technology-wise. I'll leave others to comment on the quality of the commentary or whatever, but just purely from a technological point of view, to get it all together was fantastic.
Unless you knew otherwise, you would just assume that the commentators were seen in the stadium. Then the only time that I really noticed it was in one of the T20s or the ODIs, where dear old Nasser was commentating and said, I think he's got enough of that. And it would sail. Well, no, it would the other way around. It would sail 20 rows back into the stands. Yeah, he's just about got enough.
It's impossible. What you can tell is you get a sense of how well he's timed it and the sound off the bat, but the ball flight, it's really hard to say. And what I was doing was just waiting, actually, until it was clear whether it was going for 6 or trying to be out. So I kind of pause, but then you don't get the immediacy of the commentary. But
is it true that Bumble was on a slight delay as well because of the way he was set up?
Well, the way we set it up was that if you were on with Bumble, who was obviously sitting in Manchester, as you said, we had Keys' iPad there next to us with Bumble on FaceTime and the monitor and what we call a fruit machine, which gives all the information about, partnerships and over bowled and all that kind of thing. So we had 3 screens to look at, and you need to be able to see Bumble, your co-commentator, because if you can't see him, you don't know when he's going to speak, and you'd end up speaking over each other. So it was really important to have Bumble on FaceTime, but 3 screens there, it was a bit chaotic.
Well, I thought Sky were fantastic. They have been fantastic this last 12 months, just in being innovative with the situation, and things like the cricket show and the various masterclasses and things that you do have been really interesting, and I think a lot of it has worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, it needs must, and one or two of the things that we've done, the toss, for example, we thought, well, how do we do the toss? Because normally I or Nas or whoever would go out there to conduct the spin of the coin and ask the questions, but we weren't allowed to be anywhere near the players in the inner zone. So we devised, not me, but the gurus at Sky devised the mobile camera with a microphone for the captains, and out toddled this mobile camera being remotely controlled. So amazingly innovative, as you say, lots of very smart people there who know what they're doing.
a long way from Tony Gregg and his car keys.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Before you go, we always like to get a bit of music, because we mix the show up with cricket and what bit of chat and whatever else, and a bit of music. And we like our guests to request something. Bumble chose a track by The Fall. NASA chose The Cranberries. I can't remember what keys I think it was something like Dolly Parton or something like that that he chose. Have you got any thoughts about?
Well, I'll give you the one I've been last listening to, Cleopatra by the Lumineers. I don't know whether that meets with your approval or not.
I don't know it. I think I'm going to have to look that one up. When you said, I thought you were going to say Cleopatra, the girl group from the 90s.
No, the Lumineers. Cleopatra. Just the last one I was listening to before I came on. So,
all right. Well, we'll play that one for you. But we'll let you get on. And many, many thanks. It's been great fun. Make sure you tell NASA and Bumble that you've been on with us.
I will do. And
they were excellent fun. And
thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure and an honour. Thanks a lot, Mr. Michael Atherton.